So, Ruby Volume 6. This is going to be very difficult because I'm going to try to be very comprehensive and cover everything in Volume 6, as well as I'm going to talk about the show overall and try to sort of reinterpret it. Because basically, what I think it's relevant at this point once again to start basically reinterpreting everything. One of the things I did in preparation for this is I rewatched my very old videos, like 4 years old at this point, talking the QAs for Rupees Volume 1 and 2. And I had a totally different attitude with this show back then. Looking back at it now, it's like a question of what the fuck was I even thinking? Well, I'll try to answer that as we go along. But there are very good reasons why the attitude has shifted over the course. So, Volume 6. Right off the bat, the first thing I want to mention is it's very clear as we've gone along with every successive season, Ruby has started to feel more and more like a professionally made thing. Basically, right off the bat in this volume, just everything from the way things are shot to the way that tension builds up, the way it's directed, the way that the music is used, all of it feels much more like a conventional, competently made thing and not something that's being made in someone's basement, which is what it felt like before. So that's a good thing. It almost feels as if somebody new came into the picture who, has had more experience in in this sort of discipline, who basically directed or drove the direction of this volume in a way that makes it feel more professional. I'm just going to go over examples of that. Like the very first example of that would be in episode 2, which when I first watched it was like my favorite episode at the time. The way that tension built, and the way it's not even the tension that's being built. It's the way that it's shown as well, with like the escalation of the process and the conflict that they're having with Ozpin then, and then the way everything is sort of built up and framed, and then they say, then Oscar jumps in and warns them and tells them to say Jin, and then you just see all of like the snowflakes stop falling, and the music stops, and it's very like, it's one of these like wow moments. And then there's another wow moments when Oscar lunges at Ruby right before she gets pulled into the the vision. There's a whole bunch of these like wow moments like scattered throughout this entire volume. It's very clear that they were going for that kind of like professional that sort of like professional way of storytelling and doing visual media, where it's like things really have this kind of everything's just very like accentuated. There's moment after moment, virtually every single episode, where something important happens and it's emphasized properly, and you know that it's supposed to be important. The same thing happens during the whole Brunswick Farm arc, and then later on near the end, where Ruby unlocks her silver eye power and uses it against the Leviathan. That's another good moment of that. It's another good example, is what I mean. It's very clear that they have at least from like all the production perspective, everything that's being done there is finally like proper, which is why you could easily say that this volume is better than Volume 5. This also reflects on this also applies to the action sequences. Back in Volume 5, there was action sequences where people just did nothing and stood around in a room while action supposedly happened. Here, things are constantly moving. There's constantly a sense that things are happening. There's still all these weeb moments, though, where characters just action interrupts for characters to explain to one another what's happening, like Blake telling Yang how Adam's semblance works, etc. Things like that. Shit like that just keeps happening in these fucking shows, so you're gonna get that. There's also all kinds of like built-up aspects of their fighting styles that are just sort of, they're not even being mentioned, but they are present in the presentation of the action sequences, like Weiss constantly using her glyphs everywhere in like every fight, even though it's not, they don't have to say it, they don't have to emphasize it, they don't have to put up neon lights. to remind us her like supporty role in the functioning, you know, in the team. She just does it, and it's like, it's good that it's there. It's good that they haven't forgotten to add that stuff in. They wrapped up Adam's story this volume. That's good. I guess it was about time that they would finally take that whole chunk of the narrative and finish it off. It honestly should have ended last volume, but there's basically that. Yeah, then there's the whole Brunswick section. The whole Brunswick section overall as well, just like from a basic narrative perspective, was a good idea. The fact that you had this whole kind of like eerie, it almost felt like a D&D section, like a D&D session. Like everyone's got their character, and they, you know, and it's like they get into the town and they don't know what's going on, and they have to figure it out. And figuring it out, there's a confrontation with the creatures. That's how the whole section came across, and it was good. It was a good break from all the drama and the tension that had happened previously, and it emphasized. Didn't emphasize. Well, it gave the characters a moment to breathe. It also reminded us that, you know, the kinds of dangers that could exist in the world. And I like that they keep trying to invent new kinds of Grimm and set them up in this sort of D&D-esque way where they're actually a threat, mostly because the characters don't know who they are or how these Grimm work or how they're supposed to deal with them, right? They can go all kinds of directions with that, especially with Salem creating new Grimm and we don't even know the extent as to how far that can go, right? The further they go with making intelligent Grimm, the more interesting a villain the Grimm will be. So that's good too. Ruby finally learns to use her powers, which everybody complained that she wasn't getting that. That finally happens. Honestly, it wasn't a problem that she never learned how to use her powers before now. The problem with what was happening beforehand was that the problem was there was no sense of progress in anything. They didn't need to necessarily, it didn't need to involve Ruby learning how to use Silver Eye powers, because Silver Eye powers are OP anyway. She could have been learning anything, right? There's all kinds of ways to make characters progress, narratively speaking, without necessarily having them gain something big, which this is, you know, gain something big. It almost gets into an interesting problem, which is that where do they even go from here? All of the characters are essentially at their peak level of strength, at least as far as like what's foreseeable. They could always introduce new things and be like, oh, you guys haven't trained enough, you need to train more. Okay, and then they gotta go train more. But as far as like what's been established, they've had all the growth, they've had all of the obvious projected growth that you could assume that they would have had. I mean, in fact, they came into Volume 1 already being amazing fighters, and then they learned to work as a team also in Volume 1, in like the first, you know, fight with the Nevermore. That's when they learned to fight as a team. So now there's no more growth in that direction. And the only thing since then has been Ruby learning to use Silver Eyes. So there's no more potential growth in that area, which is a problem. And, well, I guess this is probably a good time to segue into what I really think of the show. See, don't be fooled by the first 8 minutes of this review where it seems like I was praising this thing, because I fucking hated this volume. And for the longest time, I was trying to figure out why. And the reason I bring it up in terms of like there's no sense of them progressing anymore, that's actually the first thing I thought of when I started watching the volume. The reason is when you look at everything in culmination and just aggregate it and look at the whole picture, it's like a heap of trash, and there's just like some things that feel like they're good ideas with the show overall. Let me explain what I mean. The overall like thesis here isn't that... There's still an open question, I guess, at least for me, as to what the value of Ruby is as a piece of content, but the value of Ruby as a story, as a narrative, as, I guess, as a piece of storytelling art is pretty bad. And, well, I mean, let's get into why. So the season starts off And it starts off in the typical, they're jumping around, having fun kind of way. Yay. They dismiss Sun immediately. That might be something I bring up later if I don't forget. But I understand why they got rid of him as far as plot, you know, because they want to do this thing with Team RWBY. The problem is that, you know, Sun and Blake were more interesting than Blake and Yang. So you have that. And everything, it's like, RWBY has this weird syndrome. It's like, how do I explain this? Okay. Let's take a step back. Back in Volume 1, back in Volume 2, if you go back and watch my videos, and I went back and watched my videos, what I really like was RWBY was no less ridiculous of a story back then than it is now. It was no less absurd, but I was very positive about it. And I was wondering, I was trying to figure out, while watching this entire show, why I was so positive. Why am I suddenly so negative about this show? And the reason that I've found is because of anticipatory quality. See, Volume 1 and 2 didn't feel like a story. Volume 1 and 2 felt like a proto-story. It felt like the beginnings of what could have been a story, or if it was trying to be a story, it would have been a story that wasn't about worlds or people or characters, but how we get from one action sequence to the next. And the action sequences were actually cool. You know, the visuals of them, and like the long extended shots without jump cuts, the way you can tell that the way the characters moved, all of that Monty stuff. All that Monty stuff was great. None of it's here anymore. And the show feels like it's trying to tell a story, except if you take anything seriously, or if you're used to taking anything seriously, it fails at every turn. I found myself having to go out of my way to really try to not hate it as I was watching it. Volume 6. Like, I had to... See, back then, the difference was back then was like a very positive time for Rooster Teeth. They had finished Season 10 2 years ago, and they were 2 years into the Chorus trilogy of Red vs. Blue, which I was still enjoying. I felt like I owed it to them to be positive about that thing. That's one of the reasons why I was so positive about it. I don't feel like I owe it to them to be positive anymore. So now I can look at this thing more realistically. I have to wonder whether or not it's my ability to just take things super seriously that got me so critical with this thing, or whether it was like that the show just makes it that easy. And I was struggling with myself, because when the very first episode where you see RWBY just smiling and then just jumping around the whole station, I kept thinking to myself, okay, Anton, try not to hate this, okay? You don't know what they're gonna do. You owe it to be fair, right? Try not to just be an asshole. But they make it so fucking easy. So I realize I'm sort of jumping around here, but I swear I'm building to the point here. They make it so easy. I had to, even trying not to hate it, they gave me so many chances, so many ways and opportunities to just be like, this is just stupid. Everything that's happening is just stupid. So the first point that I have is they're going to Argus, they're getting on a train, they don't have any winter clothing, which it's one of these points that it's the first thing that catches your eye, because you're like, why aren't they wearing winter clothing? And this isn't that big of a deal, because it could easily be a production cycle related thing. What's annoying about this is how there's actually people who try to reverse justify it like it makes sense. Like, when you're going to a cold place, a cold city, you aren't going to put on the warmest thing that you have to be warm as you get there. Meanwhile, you have Yang with her stomach and tits hanging out, and Crow with his sleeves rolled up. All the while, there's a blizzard outside, and they should be freezing and having hyperthermia, but, you know, whatever. It's a small point, but don't defend it like it's okay. Don't defend it like it's something that's smart or acceptable. Oh no, they're going to get a set of winter clothes in Atlas. Nonsense. That's just like the first thing that you notice. The second thing, while we're still in episode 1, is... So they do this thing where they've tried to start off like every episode with some sort of bang, with some sort of shit is going to go down kind of thing. And here they have an attack, the Grimm attack this train. And then there's all this ridiculous drama with the huntsmen that are trying to defend the train. Like, okay, I have to say, I swear to God, I am not trying to be negative here. I am not trying to look for reasons to hate RWBY. But the thing is, if you try to scrutinize things even a little bit, you will find a heap of reasons to hate RWBY and everything that's happening. That's what happened here. Why exactly does Qrow and Oscar tell random huntsman man to turn off the turrets when the turrets are killing the Grimm that are attacking the train? When the train is already protected with all of this shielding and shit and there's turrets to protect it, why is that like a good idea to turn the turrets off? That they wouldn't help you clear the army of Grimm faster? It's such a weird... I don't even want to spend that much time analyzing this because I'm never going to get through the entire volume at this rate. It's such a weird thing. It's such a weird aspect of the conflict in that scene. Because here's the thing. You don't even need that turret point to be a thing. Because it's only afterwards that they decide, hey, you know, you guys mask the train while we go clear the Grimm. We'll clear the Grimm and stay behind. You guys will get away and go to Argus. All right, sure, that's part of the plan. They didn't need to have that whole sequence with the guy arguing with Oscar about turning the turrets off. But what pisses me off about that scene is that the way it comes across, it's treated like what Oscar requests of him is just the obvious thing that you'd want to do in that situation. Yeah, there's an army of Grimm attacking the train. What do you do? Oh, yes, let's turn the turrets off. That's obviously what you want to do. That's the clear thing. It makes sense only if you consider that, like, they need to lure the Grimm to a certain spot. They need to lure the Grimm to a certain spot, and the turrets aren't killing them, they're just distracting them. But that doesn't work for two reasons. A, the Grimm were being destroyed by those turrets, some of them. And reason number two is they didn't need to lure them to anywhere. Right? Like, the train is already in danger, whether the Grimm are attacking it at the back or the front or wherever the fuck it's happening. So if they wanted to avoid a fight with the Grimm, it makes sense after they establish that they want to just separate the train with the people from where the Grimm are going to be. Then you turn off the turrets. But that wouldn't have, if they did that, there wouldn't have had to be any conflict about it. Right? They would have just said, look, we'll save the passengers. Ren will hide the train. Team RWBY's going to go clear everything else. But if you think about it, given how easily RWBY cleared all of those Grimm, they didn't even need to do that. They could have just stayed on the train, cleared the Grimm, and that was it. I mean, there's no real reason why they had to separate the train. It was just constructed so that they could separate the party. And I thought at the moment that the reason they did that is because, you know, Team Juniper and Team RWBY were going to be separated for a while. They were each going to go on their own little quest. That didn't happen, because then they get reunited halfway through the season and everything goes back to normal. They weren't even that far from Argus. That's something I could mention later, but I'm just going to complain about it now. They were like an hour from Argus. After they spend the night in Brunswick, they make it to Argus in like a few hours. It just makes... The construction of everything here is just so clunky. The only reason this happens, any of this, is to get them separated, because they wanted them to be separate. Probably because, I don't know, easier to animate, easier to tell the story. I don't know. Easier to explain certain things. Maybe they wanted to save the Jean confronting Oscar scene till later, whatever. But the whole conflict of they need to turn the turrets off, like... I would have been almost completely fine with this entire scene. I wouldn't have even complained about it if the the point where Oscar tells Random Huntsman Man to turn off the turrets didn't happen. Because that was the point where I can tell that the story was trying to sell something retarded and shove it down my throat. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have even thought about any of this. It would have still been weird, but it would have been whatever. Okay, it's a little silly, it's a little contrived, sure, whatever. But the fact that that moment, that super non-genuine nonsense moment happened, exposed the nonsense of this entire event. So, great start. The rest of episode 1 was fine. The action was cool. I mean, they do that thing where it's like, you know, everything's exciting and there's wonderful action. There's music playing, etc. I actually complain about the action now. It's better than the action Volume 5. I would say at this point, though, I'm getting a little fatigued with just the nature of this punk rock action repetition, because it's always the same thing. You know, epic rock music starts playing, and then fucking, you know, Ruby does something cool, and then the Grimm gets killed, and then we move on, and it happens over and over again. It's the same exact thing. You know, this is the real, this is the real problem with the show, is that what would have justified every action scene was Monty, because he knew how to make the action scenes work. Minus that, sans him, it's just like it's like they think that they need to put an action scene there because it's RWBY and they're supposed to have action scenes here. So that's how that feels. The other thing I want to mention, a lot of the action, while there is a sense that there's all this movement, it's not like awkward feeling where nothing's happening while there's all these characters in a room. A lot of this action just feels jittery and weird. Like there's shaky cam. This is the action scenes we see in Marvel movies again. There's just like jittery and weird cuts in weird places and timing, and there's like weird, bizarre cinematography, which especially like this goes further on with that fight that Blake Yang have with Adam, where it's just like you can't even tell the way characters are moving anymore because of how it's cut. So it's just like, it's not impressive is all I'll say. It's more competent, but it's not impressive. I would probably say that that's generally the perspective I have of RWBY overall now. Like, everything feels competent, none of it is actually good. And there's plenty of shows in the world that are like that. You know, they're very competently made, they're not good. So the turret. So then there's Adam. Oof. I wonder if I should talk about Adam now or later. See, the Adam problem connects to a larger setting problem. So I could talk about, you know, okay. Jesus Christ. So there was an Adam trailer before RWBY Volume 6, and the reason the Adam trailer happened was because they probably realized they were going to terminate Adam's story this volume, but they didn't actually do anything with him in Volume 5, so he had no character arc, and this was done to give him more of a character arc and explain some of the things that happened. That being said, everything I don't want to... Okay, no, I'm going to get into the Adam trailer later. But suffice it to say, I guess, like, the whole idea that he was always stalking them, which is kind of ridiculous, okay, in principle, I'm with that. I kind of have to force myself to be with that, but let's say I'm with that. The problem was all of the conflict in the Adam scene where Blake and Yang confront him is just like... He still feels like... He feels like a non-character. Like, he feels like a guy who is just violent evil for the sake of being violent evil when he's supposed to be. When really, he could have been far more interesting and sympathetic if they just developed him more, right? In fact, he got the most development in the final scene when he reveals the scar with the SDC, like, brand on his eye, right? They could have gone a completely different direction for him, but this would have all worked far better if they knew his story from the beginning. It's pretty clear that they only realized, like, this volume that they needed to do something with Adam, because this is where they were going to wrap him up. It's like they just awoke to the fact that, hey, Adam has never been a character. Let's try to make him a bit of a character here. and then they kill him. So he was never really a character, but he got killed. I'm going to talk about Blake and Yang a bit as well. Let's get to episode 2. I'm going to skip through... Yeah, I want to go through this chronologically because this might be a really long video as well if I manage to get through everything. Pretty action, White still supporting. Oh, yes. Turrets. Winter clothing. And then we're introduced, right before episode 1 ends, we're introduced to Consuela. Or Marta, Maria, I'm going to call her Consuela. She's fucking Consuela from now on. We're introduced to Consuela, and this is like, like I'm telling you, it's so easy to shit on this show. Like, you have to go out of your way. You literally have to, like, you have to, like, force yourself. You have to have the self-control of a fucking Buddhist monk not to hate on this show. Consuela just shows up, randomly out of nowhere. And then all volume from now, she starts telling people what to do and who to be and do. This volume is way more entertaining to watch if you just assume she's a crazy, senile old woman who doesn't know what the fuck she's doing or where she is. They literally tell everyone to get to the front of the train. Jean and Nora are there, like, forcing people to the front of the train. They're like, let's go. And then Consuela turns around and walks to the back of the train. By the way, you know, completely uniquely designed character is going to be important, is obvious trick. Got it. And then they don't notice that she does that. Jean and Nora don't notice. Nobody else notices that this random crazy old woman's just at the back of the train. She's completely unhurt when the train crashes. And then she just shows up. And she's like, yes, I'm here to be an old woman. Awesome. And nobody ever asks why she stayed on the train. Nobody even wonders. It's like the most amateur moment possible. Let's introduce a character in a way that's weird, but pretend that it's normal. And then she's just there the whole time. And then they keep acting like she just fits into the group. Like she's just there to be in the group. Why? Maybe she has some kind of thing with Ozpin going on, but you can tell from the way this is written that they didn't even think of this. Or they didn't think that it mattered. They were just like, we need to add her because we need her to do the thing with the silver eyes thing. So let's just throw her in. But why is she there? I don't want to go into her voice. Nope, there's no reason. She's just there. She's just there to be an old woman. And then she's just there to be like comic relief, which I'll talk about later. The humor style of this volume. So, yeah, fucking Consuela. Then we're on to episode 2. I'm still on episode 1. Jesus Christ, this is gonna take this fucking video is gonna take a long time. And then Cinder comes back. Cinder's alive. I thought Cinder died in volume 5. Why the fuck is Cinder alive? I'm just curious as to what the fucking point of this is. Why? Who cares? Who wanted Cinder to be alive but, like, the 3 people that actually like Cinder as a character? Why does Cinder here? How deep do I want to get into the problem of Cinder? You realize Raven, like, there's no reason she should have lived because Raven could have killed her. Like, she essentially lived because Raven decided to take mercy. Because Raven could have just turned into a bird, flown down that chasm, cut off her head, thus maybe guaranteeing herself the maiden powers, possibly, but at the very least, you know, throwing a wrench into Salem's plans because Cinder was Salem's pawn and Raven knew that. Raven just lets her go, and then Cinder's perfectly alive, and she's around to do the same shit she's always done since Volume 1, which is be stupid evil. Here's the problem with Cinder. Just to put it, like, basic, her entire character is one thing, which is stupid evil. That's all she is. She's evil for no reason. She wants nothing except, like, power. She doesn't care about anyone or anything. And everything that works out for her works out for absolutely no reason. Why did she survive Ruby's Silver Eyes? Just cause. Why did Raven not kill her? Just cause. Why is she getting away with being stupid evil? Because everyone lets her. And she just has this dumb fucking smirk on her face the whole time, everywhere she goes, like she somehow earned her, you know, She somehow earned the right to be there, even though she didn't do anything. Her entire character reeks of contrivance and being forced into this story like she matters when she does not. That's the problem with Cinder. Although you could say that about a lot of characters in this show, that they're being sort of forced into something. Relic attracting Grimm. Okay. So I have to think about how to tackle this, because the whole Ozpin thing is going to be hard to unpack. You know, at this point, let's forget this thing. Let's just pretend that RWBY, like, you can turn your brain off and watch RWBY and totally enjoy it. I'm going to rip this story in half with how dumb it is if you take anything seriously. It's insanely dumb. And the way that they handled Ozpin this volume was pretty fucking atrocious. So, he didn't tell them that the relic attracts Grimm. Believe it or not, that choice isn't that big of a deal. That's not a flaw. People immediately jumped on that, some of the critics, and I'm like, no, okay, that's not necessarily a flaw, because his reason for not telling them, even though it's not necessarily good, it's not necessarily that bad either, right? Because he gives an explanation. His explanation is, well, I didn't want to tell you because it would have caused more negativity, which would have made things harder. Right? You see, the funny thing is that choice that he made, that's kind of a no-win scenario, thinking about it, taking it seriously. If he didn't tell them, then they ran the risk. Well, if he did tell them, like he said, it would have caused more negativity. Grimm could have shown up, and it would have guaranteed Grimm showing up. If he didn't tell them and Grimm still showed up, it would have created the situation they were in. So it was lose-lose. So you actually kind of understand that scenario. Here's the problem. I really liked the second episode the first time I watched it. I watched the volume twice, by the way. Watching it back, everything from the moment he gives that explanation feels like they are trying to shoehorn the next big plot thing that's supposed to happen, which is episode 3. And I'm probably not going to be able to move on without talking about episode 3. I already said that the way that they did the presentation of it was really cool. The snow stops falling when they say Jin. Oscar lunging for RWBY right at the end. It's all really good. It's dramatic. It's great as far as, like, this is how you tell a story. This is how you present a story. But everything that's happening narratively doesn't make any fucking sense. Why exactly are they pissed off at Ozpin? No, really. He gives them a perfectly reasonable explanation for why he didn't tell them. Right? Pay attention to the way Yang reacts when he doesn't tell them. She's, like, furious with him as if she knows he's hiding something villainous. It's as if they read, Miles and Carrie, like, paid attention to the fact that everyone's suspicious of Ozpin now, and then they just made that happen because this is what everybody wanted to make happen. You know, it's like they're listening to the fans to decide how to tell the story and doing it wrong. Yang's response was, why are you not telling us everything? And then he gives a perfectly cogent response. And I want to stress, again, they have no reason to think that he's a bad person at this point. It's even more significant when you think of the fact that everything they are doing at this point, they are doing because Ozpin told them. The only reason they are even going to Atlas is because he told them to at the end of Volume 5. And supposedly the logic is that they need to move the relic to keep it safe. Okay, that's a cogent reason. But suffice to say, the whole reason they are enlisted in this private little secret task force of saving the world is because Ozpin made it so. So naturally, they are not in a position to make certain kinds of demands from him. And they are also not in a position to really distrust him to the extent that they have. I complained in Volume 5 that they were not curious. The thing is, the same problem exists in this volume. It's the exact same problem, right? It's not so much that they're not curious. I'm reinterpreting it. The problem is that they take everything for granted. They are taking for granted that they are supposed to be upset with Ozpin now, right? They're not asking him any questions. You can easily flip the scenario on Yang and be like, well, bitch, you didn't ask any questions. Why are you upset when you didn't do anything last volume to prevent this scenario? You fed everything he told you. He spoon-fed you information that you accepted, and now you're going to be upset about it? Please. There is... The problem is there's just so much that they don't know about the situation that they're in for them to even begin distrusting him. For them to start seeing him as the one who's being the villain. Ozpin hasn't, like, thrown information their way this whole time. He's been very secretive, right? And they have assumed that he has reasons to do that. Moreover, they don't know that he doesn't have good reasons to do that, right? So, while the escalation that led to the reveal of Jin was pretty good, the logic of it is fundamentally flawed. It's incredibly forced, and it's even weirder when you start thinking about what actually started the whole thing. They were upset with Ozpin, okay? This is like Yang's reaction is exactly like what she did in Volume 5 when she was complaining that Ozpin turned them into birds. You turned them into birds! How dare you? This is like that. It's like, why would you do that? It's another thing where, like, the reaction isn't appropriate for what the situation is. What they should be doing is they should be asking questions and guidance and just, like, their brains should be like putty. Be like, Ozpin, how do we fight Salem? Ozpin, how does your magic work? What else can you do? Ozpin, please tell us, what do the other relics do? Ozpin, tell us this, tell us that, tell us that. That's what they should be doing. But instead, they take everything for granted, and they only have a problem when supposedly Ozpin does something that could be perceived as a little questionable, even though his decision was a lose-lose scenario when you put any thought to it. It pisses me off. They're as dumb as they were. They have not gotten any smarter. And this whole thing is still, like, feels very contrived, very constructed, shoehorned down your throat. Okay. I'm still on episode 2, because this isn't even the dumbest stuff in episode 2. What happens next is fucking incredulous. Oscar freezes Ozpin's body. So they're literally, like, fighting for control of his body. And you don't even notice this the first time you watch it. But the reason they do that is because Oscar says, and I quote, he's afraid you'll find out what he's hiding. Now, I, being the naive idiot that I am, assume, well, what that means is that Oscar probably just discovered, because, I don't know, their brains are, like, fused to an extent, so he has some of Ozpin's memories. Ozpin just discovered that Oscar just discovered that Ozpin did something crazy bad. Like, Ozpin really fucked up, and he doesn't want anyone to know. Or what Ozpin wants is actually pretty bad. And that might have retconned his character from the Beacon arc, but that would have at least justified this response. The way Oscar initiates that whole thing, it's as if he learned something fucking heavy and terrible. But there was no reason other than the thing he said, which is that he doesn't want you to know about Jin. You don't know why he's... But the thing is, why would Oscar see that as an opportunity to fight for control of his own body, to tell Ruby that Ozpin is lying about Jin? Why would he... Like, try to understand this for a second. Ozpin is a guy who is living in Oscar's head, who he cannot get rid of, who, at the very least... And Ruby is a stranger, and the rest of Team Ruby are people he met, like, a week ago, who he barely knows, who aren't even normal people. They're strangers to him, and there's this guy living in his head whose brain he's fused with. He doesn't know why. Like, why would he trust them over the voice inside his head? Why would he react as if Ozpin is like a stranger out to hurt him? Because that's how he acts. Why is he so concerned that Ozpin kept one secret that he's willing to literally wrestle with Ozpin to get all of this shit to happen? Also, it's as if he knows what's going to happen when they say the name Jin. That's how it sounds. But Ozpin didn't know, and Oscar didn't know any of that. Because when they go into the Jin flashback, he's there as well. He didn't know nothing. So literally, the only reason Oscar did any of this was because he was just suspicious of Ozpin for the same reason they were. It's literally simply because Ozpin lied about one thing. I'm sorry, that's not enough. He cannot be a bad guy. He cannot... He cannot... It does not merit that reaction. It's not it's not authentic. Like, it's not an authentic moment for you to, you know, completely jump ship, wrestle for control of your own body against who is essentially, you know, your entire identity is now defined by this person who you're sharing a body with, to go against him over something you don't even know the significance of, right? Maybe they would have had a conflict. The other thing, this wasn't even built up. It's not like Oscar has been having an internal conflict with Ozpin this entire time back in Volume 5. No, this comes out of nowhere, right? I thought the only way that this would have made any sense was if what they found out made Ozpin look really fucking bad. Like, it made Ozpin look like a bit like he was murdering puppies or children or raping kids or something. That's the only thing that would have justified this. Something really bad happening. As it stands, it's fucking idiotic. Like, they could have had a whole conversation inside Oscar's head. Oscar could have asked Ozpin, why didn't you tell them the truth? What's going on? And naturally, Ozpin would have had to tell Oscar those things because they're supposed to learn about these things together. They're sharing a body, and obviously they're partially sharing a mind as well. Ozpin wouldn't be able to keep secrets from Oscar, would he? Not for too long. This entire scene is so contrived when you rewatch it and think about what's really happening. It's... oof. It's insane. Jin was cool. The way she shows up is kind of cool. That's all I can say about that. One thing I want to mention about Jin. It's emphasized and it presented in a way where it's clear that Jin is sort of the authority on what is truth in this setting. But I want to point out that they could still easily retcon these things because Jin doesn't actually tell them everything. Right? They asked her, what is Ozpin hiding? But I imagine there's a million things Ozpin hasn't told them. In fact, there's a million things that Jin completely glosses over in her story. So what they actually learned is only the stuff Jin chose to tell them, which means if there's any other relevant information we don't know, which there is, as I'm gonna point out, we don't know what it is, and neither do the characters, and they're probably acting as if they do know all the information that's missing. My point is, even if Jin is a reliable truth teller, she's not a reliable storyteller because we don't know what she's omitting. She's responding based on her interpretation of the question you're asking her. And this is important for when she responds to Ozpin's question about how to kill Salem. I mean, does anyone in the universe watching the show really believe that there's no way to stop Salem? I don't. And I don't think anyone does. Because there wouldn't be a story if that were the case. That line is designed for one thing, which is to make things seem, ooh, spooky, how do we stop Salem? It's designed to make things seem hard, that's it. It's not actually the truth. So, the fairy tale nature of episode 3. I want to say, as I was first going through this entire volume, the whole setup of all this was really good. The fact that they were trying to launch right into this thing felt like the right move, because it's like, oh, well, they're making up for lost time, basically. They're trying to tell the story, whilst previously they hadn't been doing that. So this was good, or at least it seemed that way. And the first half of Jin's tale is actually decent. It's just... I don't know how to put it. It's just vague enough. So let's put it like this. It is just authentic and expository enough to explain a lot of what happened, whilst also being vague enough where things can still be speculated on and debated and theorized and thought about and so on and so forth. And then finally, it's still in a way where there are further reveals to happen. That's how it feels during the first half, especially since we don't even know how... They asked what Ozpin didn't tell them. They didn't ask, you know, everything that happened, right? So we don't know how many other things happened that Jin didn't tell them about, or that Ozpin didn't even know about. Okay. Yeah, the gods are pretty cool. They explained the way the moon shatters. Finally, that's all that stuff. There's a lot of things here that were probably thought of a really long time ago, like when they first started setting up some of the visuals for the show, which is good. The problem is there's like a million other details they clearly didn't think of. So I imagine that Monty's notes for what the show was supposed to be were insanely sparse, and they're just trying to like reverse justify some of them because it still doesn't feel like a proper story. Well, I'll get into why. Yeah, I have a whole bunch of notes about this episode. All right, so the first question I have. This is the part when they first start getting angry with Ozpin for lying. I want to explain, first of all, lying is not an inherently bad thing. If I find out that you lied to me, I'm not going to be mad at you necessarily, especially if you give me a reason. And Ozpin does give them some good reasons. It would actually have been a much better story arc if he's been lying to them from minute 1 all the way till now, and they slowly started piecing together that it was one lie after the other, and there was actually something hideous that he was concealing. But literally every lie that's happened has more or less made some degree of sense and actually paints Ozpin as not the bad guy, but it's not like he's lying because he wants to. Literally every single lie feels like a lie that he basically had to tell. The biggest problem with this entire show at this point and this very episode and this very moment is that they castrate Ozpin completely. They basically make him out to be a completely incompetent, completely ridiculous moron who's evil for lying, and that's basically it. And they ignore all of the reasons and all the context and any of the complexity behind why any of the shit that happened did. So this is like step 1 in the destruction of Ozpin arc, which is what this thing should honestly be called. The first thing that I noticed, and I didn't actually notice, I noticed this more upon rewatching the volume. It's very weird the way they present this Ozma character, because Ozma is clearly not Ozpin. First of all, she looks suspiciously like Oscar. He has Oscar's voice actor, and he doesn't act or do anything or is even presented in a way that Ozpin was. What is Ozma's design? Is he's a guy who fights for truth and justice. He fell in love with Salem and died, and then he was inducted into this whole thing with some reason. I'll get to that later. It's so weird. Why doesn't he have Shannon Cormack as a voice actor? The other thing that's weird is that Shannon Cormack voices his first incarnation when he comes back to the world. The blonde guy, that has Ozpin's voice actor. And that guy more or less feels kind of like Ozpin. But I don't know why they have Ozma. Ozma looks and sounds and behaves just like a child who doesn't know where he is. It's really strange. And then a later incarnation of Ozma also has Oscar's voice actor. I thought Oscar was a random child that Ozpin reincarnates into. Why does his voice exist in all the past incarnations? This might sound like a nitpick, but it's actually important, because I'll tell you what it does is it's sort of like it redefines the character in our minds. We start seeing him differently. This character doesn't feel like Ozpin. He doesn't feel... I don't know. The Ozpin has, throughout the entire series, felt like someone who was, I don't know, wise, intelligent, competent, but at the very least, he felt like someone who was doing things for reasons that were his own. This flashback gets rid of all of that. Everything that happens to him before being reincarnated is because of Salem. He makes no decision, other than, rescuing her and falling in love, which we don't even... Why he falls in love? I mean, there are certain things here that don't need to be explained, but it's weird that they decided to frame it this way. I think it would have been, way better if... Well, they shouldn't have gone with the romance arc between Ozpin and Salem. In fact, they probably did that to retcon and explain why maidens are a thing. That can be the only reason I can think they would even do that, because it doesn't add anything. they could have easily had, there's easily a million other reasons why Salem would be mad at Ozpin that don't involve a romantic story that, you know, had some fallout. So it's very strange that they presented him in this way, where he doesn't even feel like the same person. And if this is the Ozpin, like, the definitive Ozpin character is the Ozpin that we met in the Beacon arc. And it's his voice that you hear when he's talking inside Oscar's head. The weird thing is, like, it's that character that's being neglected, because he's almost completely absent here. So then there's these gods. Oh man, I'm not going to get through this. The gods. The gods made sense up to about half of episode 3, because pretty much around then, they started doing things that smelled a lot like contrivance. Like, okay, Salem comes to the gods to make it to bring Ozma back. Okay, one god doesn't want it, the other one does. They get mad at each other and curse her. Okay, I'm with that. Then humanity rebels, and the god of chaos, destruct, whatever, the purple one, destroys all of humanity. Like, I know gods have gods have overreacted to things throughout religion and fiction, but that seems like a bit overkill. Almost as if, just as a way to explain why we have the status quo that they have. They destroy everything and then leave. And God of Light mentions how this was a wonderful experiment while it lasted. I mean, are you seriously saying the experiment has failed just because of this? Just because of this one incident, yeah? It's a little bit contrived. Then you could hearken, you can compare this to Noah's Ark. I think the difference with Noah's Ark, though, is that God meant to destroy most of the world. Like, Noah's Ark makes way more sense than this. Than the deal that the God of Light is then about to give Ozma. Because God meant to destroy everything and then for everything to be rebuilt. Okay, and God wasn't reacting to just one thing that went wrong. God was reacting to, like, all of the sin that was happening everywhere in the world. Which, if you accept his definitions, that makes sense. They reacted to this one bitch doing one thing that they didn't like. Alright. The way... yeah. It's just... yeah. And then they leave, but we're not even really sure that they wanted to leave, because then God of Light comes to Ozma and presents him with the weird deal of, we're going to come back if you unite the relics and judge the world. So both of them left, both of them planning to come back, but they left. So did they leave knowing that humanity would come back and would rebuild and they expected it to be better? You see, the difference here is that it's like they didn't care what happened to this world. Here's the problem. These two gods, either they didn't give a fuck about Remnant, and they just fucking Thanos snap, zoom out, don't give a fuck. Or they did care and they wanted to see Remnant improve. But here's the thing is, neither of those explanations explain what happened in the show, because on the first decision they make, it's as if they don't give a fuck, they just leave. And then the second decision, it's as if they want things to improve, but they're not actually there paying attention to what's happening, right? They're off doing God knows what elsewhere in the galaxy, I think. It's really fucking strange, and my theory is, again, it's all designed as a contrivance to explain the status quo that we have. And the best evidence for this is the next scene, where God of Light is talking to Ozma in heaven, or wherever the hell they are, which, by the way, you can speculate and theorize as to what exactly the place is that they're in. It pretty much confirms that there is some sense of an afterlife and some kind of like extra plane of existence and energies that it might have that they're probably not going to go into, but it's there. So that's interesting. A thing that's important, and that, yeah, an important question here, though, for when Ozma has that conversation with God of Light is, when exactly is it happening? Based on how it's written, it sounds like it's happening immediately after the gods left. However, given what happens immediately after that, when Ozma agrees to go back. See, here's the problem. Let me just spell it out for you, just in case you know. There's like the first epic where humanity has magic and there's gods and everything's fucking great. Then Salem does some stuff. Humanity snapped into existence. Then there's the next period of time where Salem wanders the world and the gods are gone and we don't know, there's no people anymore. We don't know what's happening. And this period of time is indefinite. I didn't even notice this the first time I watched the damn show, was because when Ozma in the next period gets teleported back into the world and he sees people, I'm like, wait, is he on a different planet? What the fuck is going on? How exactly are people back? I rewatched it because like, there's no way this is that dumb. No. The way that they're back is through like evolution. That's what's happening. Is like they evolved again from the mud. So that would have been happening in the second epic while Salem wanders the world on her own. And then civilization restarts. And then Ozma comes back. And then Ozma and Salem decide to rule the world. And then they break up. And then Ozma is reincarnating over and over and over and over again, and then we get present day. So there's like a fucking gargantuan amount of history here that we just completely gloss over, which is fine, well, it's fine because you can't explain all of that. That's just too much information. But the problem is, and I bet you're asked that they don't actually think or care that they need to explain all that. Like, I don't think they need to, they think they need to explain how humanity went from not existing to coming back into existence. You know, evolution doesn't necessarily create the same species over and over again, and you can't explain the faunus as an evolutionary trick. So, but anyway, that's not even, that is small, like, very esoteric setting-related details. The problem is, when does God of Light send Ozma back? Why does he send him back, like, a fucking millions of years into the future when when humanity's already returned? Okay? If Ozma reincarnates, but he reincarnates into, like, people, and there was already, like, people have already been around for thousands of years when he shows up. So why is it that moment specifically that he gets sent back? The other thing you could say is perhaps the conversation he has with God of Light is happening right before Ozma gets sent back. But the problem with that is, A, that's not how it's written, and B, the question then becomes, why are they having a conversation at that point? Why did the God of Light decide to do this, basically? Well, I know why he decided to do it. Because we needed a way to bring Ozma back, and this was the reason. But it's actually like there's no answer, and I don't think that when they wrote it, they think that they need an answer. That's the thing that's scary. This ties into one of the fundamental problems of RWBY is that all of these things are written with all of these questions, but they're not written in a way where you feel like the questions are going to have a satisfying answer. Because I think when they actually get to the point of getting to the answer is just going to spawn more unsatisfying, weird questions. And none of the answers ever going to feel satisfying. And the reason is because they are not designing the question-answer thing in a way where they know all of the answers to all the questions going in, where everything's thought out. They're just making it up as they go along, basically. They know they need to get to some epic thing that's supposed to happen, and they're like, well, this needs to happen, and then that needs to happen. Or, no, maybe God of Light, though they just do this, and they're gods. That's good enough, right? Yep, let's just stamp, seal of approval, moving on. The thing that bothers me about that God of Light talking to Ozma scene is that quintessentially does not feel like Ozpin. Not the Ozpin that we know. He just sits there like a dumb child and absorbs everything, like drooling from his mouth, while God of Light just tells him the truth. And then he's like, I'll do it. And I'm just like, see, say what you want about Ozpin, because before in the Beacon arc, one thing that bothered me about Ozpin was that he felt like he was too wise, too OP, too aware, too everything. But here, they just make him like he's the dumbass. Like he's just a child. He doesn't know what, he just accepts all of this. He doesn't ask the God of Light any questions. You notice that's a recurring theme with like every single thing I complain about? That people aren't asking questions that the audience will have if the audience is using their brain. And it's not just like everyone should have these questions. I mean, every character with agency should have these questions. And none of these characters have the right to get upset for not getting the answers to questions that they never asked. So Ozpin, like, I could have at least, the thing that should have at the very least characterized Ozpin from the very beginning, even if you wanted him to be less intelligent and less wise, because of course he hasn't gone through all the reincarnations yet. At the very least, what Ozpin has always had and should have always had was this sense that all of his, he had a vision of something. All of his decisions felt purposeful, and everything he did felt like he did it for a reason that was his own. You don't get that from this scene where he talks to God of Light. It's not there. He doesn't have any input in that scene. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't contribute. He doesn't add. There's no authentic, like, conflict or interplay between the characters. He's not even a little bit curious about what the God of Light telling him, even though what the God of Light told him should be insane, and he doesn't even know what's happening. Like, he told him, your species is destroyed. Ozma never asks him how his species was destroyed. God of Light also tells him, your species will come back. Ozma doesn't ask him, how is my species going to come back? He also tells him, Salem is still alive. It's like, are you even interested in what's going on, Ozpin? Like, you realize you just found out your entire species got killed. Like, they're all going to come back somehow. There's all this magic and relics and bullshit, and Salem somehow survived all of that, and she's still going to be there. But she's different. He doesn't inquire about any of this. Like, are you seriously? He doesn't say, he doesn't do, he's just nothing. He's just there. Ugh. Good Lord. And it's especially bizarre considering what ends up happening later. I had another point. Yeah, he doesn't inquire about anything that's relevant, that should be relevant to him. So he doesn't actually feel like a character there. But also, he's at least somewhat warned about Salem, but then he never actually takes that warning seriously when he comes back. He sees Salem and she's all grimified and she has long fucking nails, she looks evil, and people say she's summoning witches, and she's just like, oh, hey, Salem, what's up? Let's play house for fucking thousands of years and make children. What? Like, they left out, I realized they left out part of their stories and stuff, but it's just like the whole construction of that, the sequence there, the whole construction of all of that reeks of contrivance. It reeks. You could theoretically explain how Ozma managed to get back together with Salem, even though there's like a million things that aren't going right in the world that he should be concerned about, that she's at the center of. How about even the simple fact that she looks like the creatures that are destroying people? That alone should have been like a fucking red flag of some sort. But nope, there's none of that. There's no curiosity. Everything everyone, this is the thing, this is the Ruby syndrome, is every character just takes everything for granted. Every new thing that's thrown at you is taken for granted, and they don't react to it. They react to it in the only way they could to just get to the next plot point. I'm not done with the God of Light. Jesus Christ, I'm already an hour into this thing. I'm not done with the God of Light or his ridiculous fucking challenge and deal that he makes with Ozma. I really wish Ozma asked questions so that I could get the answers that I want for what the hell's going on here. So the God of Light tells him there's 4 relics, and these 4 relics will bring humanity back. And they're scattered on the world, in the world. If you bring them together, they will summon me and my brother back, and when we get summoned back, humanity will be judged. If you don't get your shit together, you will all be destroyed. So this challenge is independent of Salem, even though it's becoming, the setup here is that he's supposed to, in order to do this, he needs to defeat Salem in order to save the world from the gods, right? Not even from her. He needs to beat her to save the world from the gods. Okay, why in the fuck do the gods give him the means to set the date of that trial? It's like they don't say, oh, we will be summoned when you bring the relics together. They don't say, oh, you know, we will come back in 1,000 years and you better get your shit together by then. It's not inevitable. Ozpin gets to decide when they come back, because it only happens when you bring the relics together, based on what God of Light says. Again, I don't even know. I don't even want to begin speculating if this was somehow explained in the fucking image songs or whatever. But it doesn't make sense. Like, this is the equivalent of God, of Yahweh saying, okay, I'm going to flood the earth and to punish humanity I'm going to punish humanity if you guys don't stop sinning. Well, okay, when are you going to do that? Oh, you get to decide. All right. How about never? Fuck you, asshole. Like, what? How about we never have, look, why are the mortals that are being judged given the power to decide when the trial of their judgment happens? What in the fuck how does that make any sense? Why is that happening? It's so dumb. It's so dumb based on how it comes across. I swear to God, there's probably going to be all these fucking smartasses in the comments telling me how, no, it actually makes sense when you think about bleh. No, it doesn't make sense based on what's in the scene. Based on what's in the scene, it's everything the God of Light does after cursing Salem is nonsense. Complete nonsense. It sounds like some contrived way. I think the reason that they make it so that the relics summon the gods is to give the relics some kind of like, magical synthesis power. Even though I don't even know how they're going to deal with this later on. They might just defeat Salem and then bring the relics together, and then the gods will be like, oh, you did good. Congratulations, you don't get destroyed. But he has no mission that's impending. So Ozpin, whatever, Oz, he has no mission that is impending. So why the fuck is he doing anything? Like, why is he in a hurry? So then he plays house with Salem for God knows how long. And I've already mentioned how this whole time period is so glossed over. We don't know what the fuck's going on. Like, Salem's living in a house next to the people. And it's like, the question at this point is, okay, what is even going on? Has she started experimenting on Grimm yet? Has she started, like, changing them and doing things? What has she been doing for the God knows how long that things have happened? What has she been doing? Who the fuck is she? It's all just like, you're just thrown into it as if it's somehow just supposed to make sense, but there's not even an attempt at explaining what's going on. Why is Salem doing anything at this point? There was still some speculation as to what she wanted. I'll actually get to that later. Because, frankly, other than the flashback stuff, all of the Salem scenes in this volume are pretty good, right? They're epic, they're tense. I'll mention this now. They explain her motivation. She wants to change the world in her image. That's essentially who she is. She's like an architect, right? She can change the Grimm, literally manipulate the matter that constitutes them and the energy, and she builds new Grimm. And I've actually seen like a theory that what Salem wants to do is create human Grimm, which would be cool, because I didn't mention in the QA, but I predicted human Grimm would be a thing all the way back in Volume 2, so that would be nice, but it also sort of justifies why people are on Salem's side, because it means, okay, she doesn't want to destroy humanity. I was a little... there was a moment of doubt there, though. Like, I have no faith in this construction of this story to think that there are any good reasons for why Salem does anything, but there's no... And there wasn't even that good of a reason for her to do what she did, that led to the whole Ozpin getting reincarnated, all that shit. There wasn't that much of a good reason, but there was something that felt plausible. Okay, she's sad that someone died, sure. And then she wandered the world, okay, sure, what's she gonna do? And then she jumped into the pool, okay, sure, what you gonna do? And then indefinite time happens, and then Salem's just living in the woods. Like, I might have to go get a refill of this, because it's actually, I am not putting this video on pause, though. I am going straight through. Good Lord, I am not stopping this motherfucker. Yeah, Salem. So there should have been some explanation for who she was and why and what she was doing. There should have been something. There was nothing. I actually was watching people reviewing episodes, and some people were speculating she wants to die. And I was like, man, this is really it's really amazing how you can just watch RWBY and assume anything is happening. Like, people, I swear to God, the only way people are enjoying this show is because they're, like, projecting what they feel onto the story when there's nothing actually there. Salem doesn't want to die. It would make zero sense if that's what she wanted. Because if she wants to die, she has no reason to be in conflict with Ozpin. Because all he wants to do, supposedly, is make the world at peace so that so that the gods don't destroy them. Right? Salem wanting to die is par for the course. That's their interests are aligned if that's the case. They're not enemies. So Salem wanting to die is just, unless Salem's trying to get the relics to destroy the world because that's what she wants. But if that's the case, God, you see that, like, if that's the case, why are people helping her? Do you see the problem? Like, there's nothing, there's no way to explain anything here that doesn't hinge on something that's nonsense to explain the major motivations of both of these fucking characters, Salem and Ozpin. It's so fucking bizarre. She definitely doesn't want to die. She doesn't act like someone who wants to die. She does things. She produces things. She acts with a plan like she wants to achieve something. And thankfully, I actually have to praise the people making RWBY here, because they were smart enough to realize that that had to be the case. In order for her to be a villain, she had to be someone who wasn't just suicidal. A person who's suicidal doesn't do things. They lie on their back, on their bed, and do nothing. And wait for the fucking heat death of the universe. They don't do things. Salem is doing things. She's not a death seeker. Yeah. There had to be a good reason for what Salem was trying to do. And they actually sort of get into her motivations a little bit with her wanting some sort of new world, as Tyrion mentions. Like I said, I speculated that it's probably Human Grimm. Whatever it is, it's something that isn't pure nonsense, which is good. And holy shit, this is like one of those moments where the RWBY fanbase is dumber than the people, than the show, because they were literally projecting something that there was no way it was actually happening. Like, Salem wanted to die. Where did you even get that idea? Oh boy. There's so much more to talk about this whole Salem Ozpin thing. So then they play house for God knows how long. And that's how the Maidens came into being, and that's a retcon. I love how you can just retcon everything now, because you could just say, oh, Ozpin was lying about everything. Retcon, GG, we're done, go out. Okay, so what are the rules then? There are no rules then in this fucking world. Ozpin was lying, even though we don't know why he's lying. Even though, if you think about Ozpin's whole quest here, it doesn't make sense for him to keep lying. Like, fundamentally, he has to tell people the nature of Salem and her story, and what she's doing, and what she's going to do, in order for people to know how to deal with her, right? Also, if you think about it, Ozpin's mission is not contingent upon Salem being destroyed. It's contingent upon Salem being depowered and everybody else being united. Remember, the God of Light didn't say kill Salem, he said unify humanity. Humanity could be perfectly unified, and Salem could still be the villain, and that would satisfy those criteria, would it not? And if you think about that, Ozpin's actually been doing a pretty good job of that. All the kingdoms were aligned with him. Everyone was doing what he says. Everyone was on his side. All of the Huntsman and Huntress academies were doing his bidding. He had basically control of all of humanity under his vision, which would have satisfied the God of Light. So what was the problem? Right? If anything, I imagine that this really only makes sense if Ozpin was always planning on revealing all of these things to people eventually. At no point does it come across like any of the shit that he didn't tell people were things that he would never have told people. All of this stuff is stuff that would have become relevant to them at a certain point, just like the thing about the relic attracting Grimm. So either Ozpin is a complete moron, despite somehow being incredibly successful at everything, or this is a plot contrivance that makes no sense. So yeah, there's that. And again, they play house for so long, and Ozpin never suspects that there's something wrong with Salem, considering, you know, she has this dark energy, and she can twist the bodies of the Grimm. But alright, he realizes it. I want to not let anyone gloss over the fact that Salem literally murders her children in this scene. Let's not forget that before we start being sympathetic to her or anything in future volumes. She murdered her own children. Or at least let them die in the fallout while she fought their father for a reason that was banal at best. Yeah. Let's not forget that. She's great mommy material. For all the fucking flack people pulling at Ozpin this season, nothing about this whole flashback makes him seem any worse of a ethical character than Salem. He still seems like the golden one, and Salem is clearly pure evil, based on everything that's presented. Just another point of speculation that I want to mention now before I forget. They demonstrate how there's like 4 powers in the universe. There's creation, destruction, knowledge, and choice, and they all have a different visual representation. Salem is destruction, Ozpin is creation, and then there's knowledge and choice. And the gods themselves have the gods themselves are highlighted with creation and destruction. Like there's the destruction god and the creation god. So basically, if the rule of 4 is still a thing, that might mean that there is also a knowledge god and a choice god, and also a knowledge, I don't know, avatar and a choice avatar like Salem and Ozpin, right? In which case, and I even foresee this might even get retconned later on, but it makes it seem like the god of light created the relics. Probably the relics were created by whoever created the gods, some sort of ultimate elder uber god. And there's 4 of them, just like there's 4 of everything, assuming rule of 4 is still a thing. Or maybe rule of 4 doesn't apply. We'll get to rule of 4 later, because in so many ways, rule of 4 is just gone from the story. I'm not done with Salem and Ozpin, by the way. I'm still on this. No. It's not done, because here's the next problem with the whole Salem and Ozpin playing house thing. When they play house, they agree to basically take over the world or start having an influence on the world. People build statues of them. They start, like, they have an enormous impact. They have a whole castle and shit. And it really makes you wonder, where is all of that influence in the lore and the history of the modern storyline? Remember, as far as, like, the history and the progression, the timeline here, I know Miles doesn't care about timelines, but, you know, reality does. So here's what happened. When Ozpin comes back, there's an indefinite period of time where he and Salem play house. Then there's an indefinite period of time where Ozpin reincarnates. And then there's the present day. This period of time, remember what the amount of shit that would have to happen to explain the present day from them playing house times is insane. Because Salem and Ozpin revealed themselves as, like, the gods of this world, the only ones who have magic, or the level of magic that, you know, the first civilization had. But nobody knows who they are. In the present day, nobody knows who the fuck they are. Nobody knows who Salem is. People have completely forgotten Salem, right? Because remember, when they tell us that Salem is a thing, Yang is like, how do you know that? That's not true. People don't even know who Salem is. So somehow, Ozpin made people forget about Salem. The second thing, people don't even know who Ozpin is. As far as they're concerned, he's just the guy, he's just the headmaster of a school. He's just the headmaster. They didn't reveal all this shit about Ozpin being this god being until Volume 4 and Volume 5, when that started being a thing. As far as the world's concerned, he's just a guy who runs a school, just like the other guys that run the other schools. And yet, there's a statue of him in front of that castle. So where the fuck did that castle go? What happened to what happened during this time period between present day and Ozpin Salem play house together for fucking however many years? What happened during that time? You see the problem? If Ozpin and Salem come in as these god beings telling everyone the world will now live by our rules, yada yada yada, they do all this shit, they fight and destroy each other, you'd think that would have had a pretty significant impact on the culture of this world. Like, people would have been aware of that, we would have heard legends of that, something about that would have felt present, but it's not. It literally hasn't been a thing until they invented it here. Goes back to my point, is that every volume feels like they thought it up on the spot without even thinking of the greater continuity. The way this would have made sense is if, from the beginning of the story, all the way back in Volume 1, or as the story progressed, they would have mentioned, you know, the old times and the old king or the old, you know, god beings that controlled things, referring to the first incarnation of Ozpin and Salem. And then you would, and then they had some different name or some different fucking thing and some legend that happened. And then this episode here in Volume 6, we actually learned what happened back then. And we learned that the Ozpin that's here now is that guy reincarnated a million times. And that would have been a cool reveal. Instead, it's just this arbitrary fact that they managed to, like, influence the world, and yet we don't see any of that influence. There's a few things I would honestly change about this whole flashback thing. One of them is that one thing I would change is that God of Darkness did not destroy humanity. He just destroyed like 99.99999% of humanity and left some small tribe somewhere in the swamp that then repopulated the earth. And that tribe didn't know what the fuck happened. The other thing that's weird is if the first civilization was around, what happened to all of their buildings and structures and all the shit that they built? Are there no ruins? You know, is there no, like, is there no archaeological remnants of that? There's no archaeological remnants of that civilization. It's all gone. I mean, that's how else would you explain like semblances and well, anything if there wasn't a sense that that history was fleshed out. You see, there was never a sense that there even was a history in RWBY. It's like all the history was just something they thought of to kind of like pretend that they were explaining things. Like, they realized, okay, well, we have 4 kingdoms. Well, there needed to be a thing with the 4 kingdoms. Let's say that there was a war with the 4 kingdoms. And there's Faunus. Well, this is a fantasy setting. There was probably a war with the Faunus, and then they like talk about that a little. But it's like every little bit of setting information we get, it just seems like something to reverse justify the concept that we already knew was true, rather than developing the history as part of a world, as part of this continuity that we know makes sense, and then us catching glimpses of it as we go, right? It's clearly being built like block by block, and it's all uneven and distorted and weird. So this, like, the fundamental problem with episode 3 is that even though it like supposedly explains all these things, it doesn't actually explain anything in a way that's satisfying. There wasn't a single thing that except for maybe the first half of that episode, but everything else, all the transition from the first civilization to the current day, all of that reeks of contrivance, reverse justifying the status quo that we have, and like inauthenticity. And then Ozpin has to come back to life over and over again, and then he asks Jin the question, blah, blah, blah. I love how we don't get to hear all the other questions he asked, whatever. And then a later incarnation of him also has Oscar's voice for some reason. And then we back in present day, and everyone gets mad at Ozpin. Oh, God. I'm only an hour 20 in. Jesus Christ. Everyone gets mad at Ozpin. Why does everyone get mad at Ozpin? Oh, he concealed all those things from you. They're not even astonished at the fact that all of this shit happened, and they don't even have questions about any of the shit that happened. The only thing they can think of is the fact that he didn't tell them. I'm sorry, how the fuck is anyone supposed to tell you that? Like, it's not like it's an easy thing to explain to people. It's very complex. It's a really complex story. But they go along with this, like, let's hate Ozpin now because, oh, he didn't tell us this stuff. Yeah, because that's an easy story to tell. Moreover, his reason for not telling them was probably good. Because his reason was to what? To keep humanity unified, right? Ah, God. Like, there's just so much information that is missing, that shouldn't be missing, that is relevant, that should influence the characters to act in the certain way that doesn't. That's the problem. Did you follow all that? There's just too much there's too much relevant information that's missing from the scene for the reaction to make any sense. The only thing they focus on is how he lied. But they don't acknowledge anything else that happened. They don't even seem impressed or amazed or stupefied, or they don't pause to even think about the gravity of what they just learned. For even a second, the only thing they can think of is the thing right in front of them, like fucking morons, that Ozpin didn't tell you the truth. What an asshole. How dare he not tell you the sprawling fucking reality of how humanity used to exist and then they disappear. The thing is, as well, There's like a million things in that flashback that Ozpin would have told them, because there's no reason for him not to have told them. It's hard to explain why Crow didn't know any of this stuff. Basically, the way Crow comes across this whole season is like he didn't know anything else about anything more so than the rest of Team RWBY. He's as ignorant as they are, even though they're total children, and he's been with Ozpin for like years at this point and has had a shit ton of adventures, but he knew nothing else. Like, they are completely rewriting reality here. Even Crow, thus far, all the way even back in Volume 5, up till Volume 5, has been the character who's been far more aware of everything that's going on than anyone else. But they completely get rid of that here. He knew nothing past what we knew he already knew. He knew nothing else. And his first reaction is to punch Ozpin. Why? There's like a bajillion ways that this is stupid. The whole reaction to Ozpin. But the fucking biggest one is that Ozpin didn't do anything wrong. He did nothing wrong. Jin just told you everything that happened. He didn't do anything to create the situation that they're in. He didn't cause it. It had nothing to do with him. It was all because of Salem and the gods and forces he had no control over. That entire arc completely and utterly redeems him 100%. He did absolutely nothing wrong. The only thing he didn't do was not tell them about it. I feel like even Yang, who's a dumbass the entire fucking show, would take a bit of time to, after she found out about what Ozpin did, you could actually go to the scene where Jin tells Ozma, whatever, that Salem can't be killed, and just look at Yang's face. All the other characters are like, oh, but Yang is like, Yang like gets angry when she hears that. And I'm like, what? Why is she an idiot? Like, I feel like even Yang, if Yang were a real person, the way she'd react to this is, what she'd probably do is she'd have a bit of understanding of why Ozpin didn't tell them. Like, I feel like that's what any person would react, that is how everyone would react in this scenario. Like, you're curious why motherfucker Jones here isn't telling you all the information, and then you ask Jin, and you experience like an entire lifetime's worth of events and all of this insanity that happened in the past, this crazy insanity, and then you're going to get mad at the guy who didn't tell you about that? Yeah, what an asshole. He didn't tell you everything. What a fucking asshole, right? Are you serious? That's what we're going with this volume? Ozpin is the bad guy because he didn't tell them shit that they should be... Like, they have a reason to ask why he didn't tell them. They do not have any cause. It's not even that they don't have just cause. They don't have any just cause to be mad at him. They have... How do I explain this? It's not just that they don't have just cause to be mad at him. I don't buy for a second that any authentic reality with human beings would react this way to what they just discovered. Everything they learned changes everything about everything. But they pretend like it changes nothing. Salem can't be killed. There were gods. There was magic. There's all this shit that just happened. You should be just astonished. You should be asking and wondering, what the fuck do we do? What's going on? They might panic. I understand if they panic. They might be incredulous. They might start to be curious. But that's not how any of them react. The way every single person reacts, from Oscar to Crow to everyone on Team RWBY to Jean eventually, which that's fucking dumb as well, all of them react as if Ozpin has committed a cardinal sin. Like he's fucking like some sort of Hitler, that he's done this horrible thing, and now they're going to, and now they are in judgment of him. Rather than being like even fucking idiots and teenagers and morons and people who have no brains or experience with anything can understand how, just by pure basic empathy, that, hey, if I have a really big fucking secret that's really complex and not easy to explain, I'm not just gonna tell you about it. It's not an easy thing to express. Why would they assume that he owed them the answer to everything. Moreover, I could even understand, like, maybe Yang would react that way, because she's an idiot and she always has been, but why does Crow react this way? Like, even Crow doesn't have the maturity. Crow doesn't have the intelligence and the maturity to see the big picture. You see what's fucking retarded here. They are shown the big picture of what's happening in the setting, but they're acting as if they only know the little picture. But fundamentally, the real reason is they know the truth of what happened, and they know Ozpin isn't at fault for any of this, but they blame him. That's not how people work. I'm so sorry. This is not an authentic moment. This is probably the biggest character assassinating moment in this entire show, period. Like, I fucking hated the Pyrrha situation and Raven. This is worse. This is so much worse. And to top it off, Ozpin had no plan as to what to do about Salem. He had no plan. No, you know, just the thousands of years he spent doing things, trying to get the relics together or hide them in the vaults, organizing all of humanity to defend against the Grimm and the Huntsmen, all of that shit, acting purposeful the entire time. No plan. He's had no plan. He's not competent either. No competence, no plan, nope. That's the level of storytelling we're dealing with here. It's very easy to accept if you just pretend that everyone's stupid, everyone's senile, and that this is a fan fiction and not a real show. If you want to interpret this as a real show with a real story, this is idiotic. This is beyond amateur writing. This feels like the first draft written by a teenager who wants to get into storytelling and has never thought about it. I need to refill my glass. I'm going to do this. I'm not pausing this video. I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to refill my glass and get back to the conversation. All right. Ozpin had no plan. No plan. None whatsoever. Yeah. That makes sense. And they take everything for... They take fucking everything for granted. Like, even the information we did get about Salem and the gods leaves so much wiggle room for what... for the ways they can deal with Salem. Like, for example, they don't need to kill her. They could just kill all the Grimm, and then she's isolated. They can find a way to imprison her. They could, maybe, she needs to learn the secret of life and death, like the God of Light said. Maybe someone else can, like, there's a million options, but they don't ask about any of those options. They don't even wonder. And Ozpin, who's been thinking about all this for years and years, while he's had time to sit and die and reincarnate and work and work and work to build up civilization, he never thought about any of this? Fucking really? Yeah. That's the level of storytelling. It's like, basically what they did is they took Ozpin and Crow and made them completely incompetent this volume. They made them into nothing so that, like, Team RWBY could be the players now that impact the overarching story. It's pretty fucking dumb. Yeah. If there's one thing I would do to fix this entire volume and this entire show, considering that all of this is canon, is make it so that Ozpin was personally responsible for turning Salem into that. For bringing her back to life, making her immortal, and destroying civilization. In other words, reverse their roles. Reverse Ozpin and Salem's role completely, so that it's not her who dies, or, sorry, it's not him who dies and gets brought back to life. Everything is being done and driven by him, and then he fucks up and maybe also kill the romance. They shouldn't fuck that nonsense. They shouldn't have been lovers. That's stupid. He should have been some kind of, I don't know, scientist or thinker or philosopher or whatever it was, and Salem was someone he knew, or someone's daughter, or his daughter, or something, someone he had a relationship with, but not a sexual one, because that's weird. And then he fucked up. Whatever happened to her that twisted her into this crazy she-bitch was his fault. He's the one who dealt with the gods and made it happen, and he's the one who fucked up in his dealing with the gods and got them to destroy civilization. That way, Ozpin is personally responsible for the status quo, which gives everyone, Salem included, to have every reason to be upset with him. And also gives him every reason not to want anyone to know. But that just would have made so much sense, wouldn't it? Too bad we can't get that. There's a big... Oh, God, I just want to jump to my conclusion about RWBY right now, but I need to wait while I get through the rest of the volume. That's episode 3. Oh, it's interesting. I have notes. Yeah. Salem, Ozpin. Yang is dumb. Crow is dumb. Salem scenes are cool. Build-up of tension. Yeah, there's a cool build-up of tension in Salem. I already mentioned the Salem scenes. They're well done generally, as in terms of presentation. But then again, that's been a consistent thing this whole volume. I praised it right at the beginning. Wow moments. Oh, the Neo shows up. Yay, Neo's back. Neo, yay! Don't care. Moving on. Then they go to Argus. Maria, and then Consuela. Oh yeah, Consuela has silver eyes, of course. One way to explain why Consuela is here would be to say that somehow she knew who Ozpin was. I mean, who trained her? We don't know anything about her, really, as to who she even was. I mean, we knew she's a huntress. We don't know who trained her. We don't know how she learned to be a huntress. So she just kind of plops into the story to give us progression on the Silver Eye thing, and that's pretty much it. And other than that, she's just comic relief. She's just a crazy senile woman who's there to, yeah, I'm a crazy old woman. That's what she is. That's her character. I'm going to talk about the humor here, because like, there's so much bad humor in RWBY. Like, at least in volumes 1 and 2, you could argue that the show wasn't trying to be dramatic or follow rules. Here, every single time they try to be funny, it just takes away from developing something, right? Because the only way they make things funny is by making things stupid. Like, oh, look, the hup guards. They're stupid, isn't that funny? Oh, look, here's a baby while fucking Weiss and Yang creepily stare at the baby while, like, drooling zombies. That's hilarious, am I right? Ha 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 ha! It's funny. Yeah. It's just like, and then Cordova, this random Atlesian, like, crazy bitch who comes in, and she's just, I'm crazy, evil, and unreasonable, and that's who I am, and that's who I'm here to be. La la. And then she just, like, it's just dumb. It's dumb. Who finds any of this funny? This isn't funny. Like, I'm gonna bring up a show like Avatar. Like, if RWBY were to try to copy anything, it should try to copy Avatar, because that is a story. That is a show that did the kind of, like, fantasy setting thing perfectly well, you know? And, well, one of the ways it would have to do that is to make things way, way simpler. But, you know, I'll bring that up a little bit later. But the whole point is, like, the way Avatar did humor was totally different from this. The way Avatar did humor is just by making the characters act like characters. You know, Sokka had his, like, inferiority complex, and Katara had her, like, you know, where she was pining after some random boy, or had a crush on, or Aang, who had a crush on Katara. Like, the characters are just being characters. They're being, you know, people, and we find it funny because we can relate to what they're going through. I can't relate to hup, 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 and fucking dumbass old woman number 1 and dumbass old woman number 2. And fucking zombie obsession with, oh my god, it's a baby, look at it. Oh my god, RWBY's eating sandwiches with 2 hands. 2 hands! It's just like, it's animu moments that are, it's weeb animu moments that are dumb, and there's no weeb animu moments that are smart. And Maria, Consuela, whatever the fuck, just becomes the goddamn peanut eating. It's like, you can't take any of this seriously when it's all this stupid. None of the people they encounter are, I guess I'll talk about Atlas right now, because I have that as well in my notes. The way they present Atlas here is like Atlas is just completely incompetent. There's not a single decision Atlas makes that makes any sense. They are presented as completely unreasonable, for no reason, idiots They the white hair, the crazy Cordova goes off, gets into the mech, and runs off to fight the kids because she's crazy evil. And they do everything wrong, and then they just open up the scenario for the city to get attacked. And this is Atlas we're talking about. This is supposed to be that formidable. This is supposed to be the only competent, threatening faction in the entire world. They have a military that could crush everyone, right? Where is all that, huh? Yeah, I'm not seeing that when they all act like morons. And the only presentation we have them as just unformidable fools. See, you can have... It's like they want to do everything they can to make Ruby and the crew as OP as possible. So they have to make everyone else either incompetent or stupid to make the story work, because there's no way Team Ruby or anyone else could earn a victory because they're actually stupid and incompetent. So that's why all the humor comes across that way. You can't actually make Team Ruby make mistakes and have that be funny, because that would just be good storytelling. Oh, God. They expand Silver Eye logic. No, that's good. I already mentioned that. I mean, I guess it's good that they do that. Bad humor. Mercury is cool for 2 minutes. Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember there's this scene where Mercury... There's a scene where Mercury talks to Emerald, and just want to mention this now. There's a scene where Mercury talks to Emerald, and Emerald is being an angsty teenager, and she's like, "Oh, where's Cinder? I loved Cinder." And Mercury just tells her, "You're fucking dumb. Cinder doesn't love you." And I loved it, because that was the only honest statement this entire volume, was him just telling her, Cinder doesn't love you. What are you stupid? He just tells her, and then he's like, "Yeah, I'm just here because of fuck it, because why not? What else am I gonna be?" Then they ruin the scene by having him go on a long, ranty, sad soliloquy about how he was beaten by his dad, and it was ooh sad. And then Tyrion comes in and taunts him. Sure. I just don't know why he was amazing during the first half of that scene where he just acted like he didn't give a fuck. Then he tried telling Emerald how he felt, and it ruined everything, because what it meant is he actually did give a fuck. Because if you didn't give a fuck, you wouldn't tell Emerald all that. If he didn't give a fuck, he wouldn't go on about his life and his trauma. No, he doesn't give a fuck. And it would have been nice, because this would have been a character that would have actually been a nice... not every character needs to have a big, impactful trauma that they're trying to get over, which is how they seem to want to write every damn character in this show. There was some trauma that happened. There's drama, and now they're recovering, and that's the character. They didn't need to have that. Mercury could have just been a guy who didn't give a fuck, and that would have been fine. I remember I enjoyed that scene. I was surprised I was actually enjoying this volume at this point, and then it turns around and he acts like a typical anime weeb. Atlas. I really don't know why they present them this way. I'm gonna get to the way they present Ruby. Arcos nonsense. There's an Arcos scene where... You guys know the Arcos scene. So the Arcos scene, the funny thing about this is I understand what they're going for. You could look at it and be all sentimental because, oh look, they're honoring Pyrrha, because Pyrrha died, and this is them trying to honor the character and act like it had, make it out like it had significance. And look at how it shaped Jean and how it shaped Nora and Ren and influenced their lives. That's what they're going for. That's not what happened. I'm sorry. I can't just, I can't realistically stand here and act like any of these scenes work. They do not. This scene is retarded. It makes so little sense. I'm going to fucking quote you. I wrote down 2 quotes from this scene. Jean mentions how Pyrrha went to kill herself in the tower. He says something about choice, and then he says there wasn't a choice to make. Yeah, there was. Like, that's just not true. There was a choice to make. She had no reason to go fight Cinder. I'm going to fucking remind people again. There was no reason. Oh, well, I was scared to fight Cinder because... No, she had no reason to fight Cinder. Beacon was abandoned and overrun by Grin, and everyone was gone, and Ozpin was dead, and they knew that, and he told them to run. And then he says... She didn't think she could win. Okay, so she didn't even think she could win, according to Jean there. So why then? Why did she fight? What was the point of her fighting if she didn't think she could win? And then they talk about, oh yes, she will be remembered, and, you know, even though she's not fighting with us, it's like, even though she's not here anymore, it's like in a way she will be. That's the last quote. It's just so, it's so banal of them trying to shoehorn this idea that Pyrrha had impact, and now she's still fighting with them. She had all this significance. They grew as characters because of her. No, no, no. None of that happened. Pyrrha, first of all, Arcos was never a thing. It was never a thing. It never got up off the ground. Like, it barely got up off the ground, and then Pyrrha died, and then the shit that happened. And she died for no reason, once more. And she died without having impact. Like, and so now they want to pretend like she had all this impact on them, which... And then you have Pyrrha's mom there, or whoever the fuck that was, talking about how Pyrrha died for this, and I'm glad she was surrounded by good people. And it's just like all of these statements that are like, this is how you're supposed to feel about this. This is how you're supposed to think. This is what happened. Even though none of that happened. It's all one giant retcon. Actually, no. It was one giant retcon. Pyrrha died for no reason. Fought Cinder for no reason. God, like, I need to get into this. The thing is as well, I've actually had, like, I've seen some people who really like Pyrrha say that, like, oh, we don't like this scene because they should still bring Pyrrha back. And I'm just thinking, it's like, at this point, do you even understand? It's like, even if they brought Pyrrha back, there's no way it would be a good story. They're not capable of making it a good story because it's pretty clear they didn't know what they were doing with her death. What makes you think they would know what they're doing with her life? There's not going to be a story here if they bring her back. It'll be as disappointing as her death was. It'll be as unsatisfying as all that. She didn't think that she could win. That's still more character assassination. That's like the three big moments across all of RWBY thus far that have had this kind of like a character, you know, based on all context, build up an expectation is supposed to do X, but they do the opposite and it's perceived as the opposite because that's what's supposed to happen. Here's the thing, they could have killed off Pyrrha eventually. They could have had the whole tragic Arcos storyline, but they didn't have it because they didn't build it. It didn't happen, and then she died. It never took place for them to get that reaction. It's like they're just trying to rush to the next cool thing without knowing how to build it up. Why is Jean so upset with Oscar? Jean goes to Oscar and he's like, again, this is the whole go back to how everybody misinterprets Ozpin thing. They're acting like, oh my god, everything we did was for nothing. What did you do? What exactly did you do? What did you think you were doing? You only found out about this Salem plot like a week ago before you came here. This is all totally new to you. You know nothing about what's going on. Before that, you were going from what? From Vale to Mistral to find out more information, to investigate Cinder and why the fall of Beacon happened, right? So that's your only motivation. So you haven't lost anything because you haven't accomplished anything. They act like they've somehow lost. They act like they've somehow, you know, like somehow this changes everything about what they're supposed to do now. Even though it really changes nothing because they're still just, they have nothing. Here's the problem. Here's the fucking problem. None of these characters have a story arc. None of them have a career. None of them have anything that it feels like what they would do or be or try to become if they weren't involved in what's going on. They all, everything they're doing basically because the Ozpin Salem thing even exists. It's because that exists that they have a reason to exist. I thought about this when the whole like the rest of Team Juniper just has coffee. I'm like, why are these characters even characters? What is their point in this story? Like, they don't have an arc. Why are they even here? Like, who are they trying to fool? Who are they trying to be? There's no fucking answer. You know, what do they want out of life? They don't feel like characters. They just feel like, well, they feel like the beginnings of characters. They feel like they would be characters if they were fleshed out and expanded upon and had a place in the world, and if the world were fleshed out and expanded upon. If there was a world. As it stands, all of these characters are just nothing characters. They're just like one-dimensional character traits. Ren, quiet. Nora, loud. Jean, fucking coward. Like, it's just like, this is the whole, like, you can describe people in one word thing. You know what? Your real characters cannot be described in one word. That's not, like, that's one-dimensional characters you're talking about. A real character probably can't even be described with one sentence. You'd need, like, a paragraph to actually describe a real character. But anyway, moving on. Oh yeah, and after he gets mad at Oscar, and everyone gets mad at Oscar, then the next time they see Oscar, they totally resolve it. Like, fucking Jean's there and just like, you know what? I was wrong to get mad at you, Oscar. What the fuck? What is the point of any of this then? Like, you're acting in the first scene like what you learned had a big impact, but then you completely turn it around like there was no reason to get mad in the first place. And that's the real problem, is that as far as all of these characters are concerned, Team Ruby and Juniper, nothing about Salem or Ozpin, nothing about that story changes anything for them. They're still the main characters. They're still doing the same thing. They're still involved in the main story for some ungodly, unbeknownst fucking reason. Nothing changes for them. So why are they acting like things change? I couldn't help but just laugh every time something dramatic was supposed to happen in this volume. Because all of it's just so, And then he just apologizes. Like it's like they realize, oh, well, John being mad at Oscar, the John being mad at Oscar arc can't go anywhere because it's not a real arc, because these characters don't have a real arc besides being strung along for the main plot. So we're just going to wrap it up here and move on. Ruby confronting Crow. This volume does a lot of shit to try and shoehorn Ruby as this, like, this just godchild who is good at everything. I know I complained in Volume 5 that they had no agency, except for when it was artificially inserted. What they did here was, it's like they took all the competent characters, like Crow and Ozpin, those guys took a back seat, and then they just thrust Ruby front and center and made it seem like she was just the one in charge and driving everything forward. When really, it's still, the whole artificiality of that still feels there. It's like, okay, great, she has agency, she's doing things, but the plot is, there are external forces forcing her to do things. She's not actually doing these things because it makes sense for her or because it's even a good idea storytelling-wise. What is Ruby bad at this point? She knows what to do in every scene. She has at least the basic situational intelligence to understand what to do. She is an amazing fighter. She crushes everyone. She's responsible for like every single victory they have, and she has an OP Silver Eye power. There's nothing stopping her. She's literally the godchild character. What's the point? Who cares? Who cares about her? It's like there's nothing to give a shit about with Ruby, because you know how it's going to turn out. She's just going to win every encounter. And I bet you now, if people are going to hear that and going to realize that, and the next volume, what will happen is they'll do the opposite thing. They're going to make Ruby lose an encounter in Volume 7 artificially again to sort of like counterbalance her winning too much in Volume 6. But it's still going to have the same problem, because it still just feels like they're reacting to the last thing that they did that wasn't done that well to try and make it done right. It's like everything the show does is them trying to like like awkwardly juggle balls that they didn't even know that they had. It's like, and every single time they do it, they realize they're bad at juggling. They just add another ball, and add to the juggle, and it's all fucking falling apart constantly. But they keep trudging on. That's what's going to happen. They're going to try to counterbalance the Ruby thing by making her lose. I can already see it happening. But the problem is everything just feels artificial. It's not so much about what the characters are even doing or how they're being presented. It's about because it's being presented well. Ruby's heroic moments are epic heroic moments. They look really nice. The music's fine. It's all fucking orchestrated just fine. The problem is that there's no reason to be invested in any of it unless you enjoy the colors. Then we have Yang and Blake. Oh, who gives... Like, at this point, I'm a Bumblebee shipper just because I want them to fucking commit to an arc. Like, at least if Blake and Yang had a thing, each of them would have more of a reason to be in the story. As it stands, they're just like... Every single scene, they're just weirdly holding hands for no reason, and you're like, okay, why are they doing this? Why are they holding hands? Just fucking scissor already, please, will you? They're in the shed, and they're like, just scissor already. And then we skip forward to the next scene where Blake and Yang fight Adam, and it's like, just fucking scissor already, by God. And then they get in the plane, it's like, oh my God, just fucking scissor already, will you? Why? They don't have... I'm really just wondering, they don't have character arcs besides what's going on that season. Do you honestly have a sense as to what their character arc is going to be next volume? Because I don't. It could go anywhere. There's no rules anymore. Like there ever were any rules. There's no rules. Well, Blake is going to be this, and Weiss is going to be that. I had an interesting discussion with someone where they posited a theory that it would have actually been a much better chemistry and dynamic if Team Juniper were the main characters of this story. And, well, for one basic reason is that part of what's driving this story is shipping. And Team Juniper actually has ships that, like, they actually have romantic chemistry, whereas Team Ruby have nothing like that. Right, so one of the problems with Team Ruby as a team, as a concept, is that it's 4 girls. And even though you could say, well, you know, 4 girls, two of them can be lesbians. Sure, they can. But they're not committing to it, so it doesn't count. Right? And on top of that, every single character on Team Ruby isn't a character beyond just the thing that they've dealt with. Like, none of them feel like worldly characters. Blake... what is her character? She's the quiet one that was wounded, and now she has to make up for the fact that she has to, you know, she has to fight back against her abuser because she was wounded. Yang, the jovial one who was wounded, and Weiss, the you know, princely delicate one who has some formidable spirit, and then Ruby, who is, you know, the cute and innocent one who can also fight really well. These aren't characters. You know, at least with Jean, you had an actual character arc at the beginning. He was supposed to get stronger. He was supposed to, like, improve. He was incompetent, whereas everyone else was competent. He was the perfect main character for this kind of story. But now he's just nothing. He doesn't have a character arc. What is he even in the story for? They might as well kill him off. Who cares? Same thing with Renan. Like... And the other thing about Arcos is that if Arcos had stayed in the story, Arcos would have actually had reason to be... Like, if Jean and Pyrrha had a relationship, both of them would have more of a reason to be in the story in order to continue that relationship. But if you kill one of them off, that entire dynamic is gone. And now the question is, what's the point of Jean in the story? Well, there is no point. He can just keep being sad about Pyrrha or try to get better or anything. But there's no... But here's the thing is, like, what are these characters trying to be and become? There is no arc. There is no sense. They're just doing the thing. They're chasing the carrot that Ozpin put in front of them. One of the things that actually, like, sort of salvaged Ozpin a tiny bit is at the end of this season, they had him return and guide Oscar's plane. So they're not making Ozpin completely incompetent. Thank fucking God, because that would actually be disastrous. I think they realize they can't juggle the ball like that. No, So they have to reel it back. But it's stupid enough that the events transpired the way that they did. People still don't have a reason to be reacting to Ozpin the way that they do. And I'm sure they're going to flip the table on that as they go, right? The thing is well, this setting is so inconsistent, like fundamentally as far as its rules and its fantasy. It's like they keep trying to up the ante as far as tech and fantasy elements every season, despite the fact that that should change the entire setting. Like Atlas was a city, but now it's a floating city in the sky with a giant fleet, and they have all this technology, you know, these giant robots and fucking force fields and all this shit to defend themselves against Grimm, yet somehow their Grimm are hunting them to extinction. They're almost destroyed. They can't even get radio to work long distances. They don't even have satellites. Like, this brings me to one of the fundamental inconsistencies of the RWBY setting itself, which is that the setting is simultaneously like, how do I put it like this? Humanity in this setting is simultaneously doing really, really, really fucking well as a civilization and doing really, really, really fucking poorly. And the way they explain it is that in the cities, things are great. Outside the cities, things are bad. But the problem is that even if that were the case, it's still inconsistent because of how the people in the cities are being portrayed. The people in these cities are just like, they act like fucking, like woke fucking Starbucks sitting, coffee drinking, you know, teenagers that have never seen a bad thing in their lives. They act like completely insulated from the realities of the world, but there's no good way to explain that, considering Grimm could literally come in and attack a plane or a train or come in on the ocean. Like, everything is threatening, but no one acts. None of the people's culturally or realistically or in their attitudes behave in a way that is a response to the conditioning that they would have had if they developed in this setting. Like, they should be way more militant and serious, non-fucking stop. The setting should be more serious, especially if you just die, if you go outside the city. You can't even make a village. It's likely to be destroyed by Grimm. It's absolutely ridiculous, like, this level of inconsistency. This is the biggest inconsistency with the setting. It didn't bother me back in the Beacon arc, because back during the Beacon arc, everything felt like it was part of a proto-story. So, you know, you didn't know where they were going to go with it, but they had to develop it in some way. As it stands, they didn't. Like, the setting is simultaneously ultra woke and progressive, and also fucking ultra regressive in like a million other ways. Like, you have Atlas, who just act like racist assholes, and then you have this city of people who are completely woke, and hey, and we have lesbian couples who are in a common law partnership with an interracial child. Great. Except for the fact that, like, everyone looks at Atlas like they're fucking weird, backwards racists, even though the people who live in this city would have to be incredibly grateful to Atlas for keeping them safe from all the sea monsters that are out there, right? There's just no awareness of the context that anything is in, or supposed to be in. The fundamental, the other fundamental problem is there's no... The setting is simultaneously ultra magical. There's almost no rules with how magic works, and yet, in order to make things happen, they fundamentally try to insert how magic has rules. There's dust, and there's semblances, and most people don't even use magic. And yet, but when you look at like the way everything works in the grand scale, almost everything is ultra magical. Even the way semblances work has no real limits or rules. All of it is just like, it's anything. A semblance could be anything, as nebulous as bad luck. And first of all, we don't even know the kinds of magic that Ozpin and Salem could do, and they've introduced gods. So like, there's like, they keep just changing they keep introducing new systems of rules. Like, they threw in this Consuela character out of nowhere. They could do the same thing, like with a new god or a new type of like god avatar. They could just come up with anything on the fly to make it seem, how do I put this? They can change the rules on the fly. Like, I'm sure next volume or the volume after that, we're going to discover some new thing about Ozpin and Salem and the magic in the world that we never knew before. But it's going to seem totally arbitrary and unsatisfying because they didn't think of it just now. They didn't think of it yet. They don't have an answer yet. But it's going to be there. They're going to throw it in. The thing is, there's nothing stopping them because there's nothing that's like tied down, anchored. The story isn't anchored. It's built on unsolid ground. It's like a house that when you walk inside, it just fucking crumbles and sinks into the sand. Yeah. The fundamental problems of RWBY. Trying to think what else I need to cover. I think RWBY as a character would also have worked far better if the way that they did her was, I actually just, you know, somebody mentioned this the other day, but it was like, basically make her a side character who doesn't have much impact on the story, but is just there and also happens to have this secret silver eye power. The reason that's important is because RWBY's not the center of attention because she's not good at everything. She's basically an unimportant tertiary side character who has this secret weapon, this incredibly powerful weapon under her sleeve. That's fine. That's great. That would have made her more interesting because it's like she's unimportant, but she's also in some sense ultra important because she has this secret weapon. As it stands, RWBY is just everything. This entire setting revolves around her and you know exactly how it's going to play out. So who even fucking cares about it anymore? They've gone way too far with her because they need to make her into a good leader too. Ugh. Meanwhile, all the other characters, on top of the fact that it's all artificial, all the other characters feel like they have no reason to be there. Like, why are they even there? They're like, I mean, I've already said this. I've already said it. The only characters that, like, the adults were the characters that felt like they had a reason to be there. Ozpin, Crow, etc. Those were the characters that were interesting, but they've been neutered because they're all taking a back seat because they want the main characters to take a front seat without actually establishing the main characters in a sensible way relative to the story that they're in. They don't have wants. They don't have dreams. They don't have goals. They just have the carrot on the stick. Oh yeah, there's also the random lesbian couple. The lesbian scene was so awkward. Like, it was awkward, first of all, because they were just, like, this family was shoehorned into the story for no reason. Like, this whole scene should have been them discussing their next move. Like, the first thing that RWBY should think of when she sees Jean is like, oh shit, we have to tell Jean and Team Juniper what we just discovered about Ozpin. But they forget about that because, hey, look, it's Jean's sister. It's amazing, right? And then we learn and look at their sister, and they have such a nice home, and they have a child, and that child is adorable and cute. And hey, everyone, look, it's my wife. Hey, here's my wife, and we're gonna let all these strangers into our home. These random, like fucking 8 random strangers. Oh, but they're huntsmen, so it's fine. We want to help them out. And then we're gonna break the law for them, by the way, and go against Atlas and break the law to help them because their business is important because they're the main characters. Are you fucking kidding me? It's so bloody contrived, every second of it. Like, you know what could have happened is they could have introduced something like, I don't know, a field office for hunters and huntresses over in Argus. You'd assume that these hunters and huntresses are like an organization. They're not just like mercenaries. What if they had a field office and someone in the field office helped them? That would have made more sense because it would have actually established hunters and huntsmen as a group that is embedded in the world and not just had random character, fucking woman 1 and woman 2 help them for no reason. Why is Jean's sister even allowed in the military base? Like, what? With a screaming child following Weiss sheepishly. It's like, yes, I'm here. I'm totally not part of the plot. And look, everyone, it's my wife. My wife. I am a woman and I have a wife. Let me remind all of you how woke and important all of this is. Thank God we're introducing more lesbians into the story. The lesbian quota wasn't full. It was only, 2/3 full. Yeah, we needed to hit that extra lesbian level. Now we're good. The reason I react to this is because LGBT representation has been done well in so many shows and times and places. The problem is not LGBT, the problem is RWBY. And certainly if this family was not LGBT, I wouldn't have, these weren't lesbians, it was just a normal couple. This wouldn't have felt weird because nobody would assume that anyone has any weird political wokist reason to throw shit like that into a story. But this family would have still been stupid and just like a contrivance to help the characters along for no good reason. And then, oh yeah, and then Yang and Ru, oh yeah, and then here's the other thing that I'm just going off on things I remember to complain about. This is what I said, I'm going to try to be comprehensive, but I don't even remember everything that's worth complaining about because there's so many fucking things. Then there's Ruby, who's just like, she's responsible for every intelligent decision that's being made this volume, even though the decisions aren't even that intelligent. People go up onto the train, they're like, Ruby, what do we do? Oh, just to make sure no one else dies. That's not a plan, Ruby. And then they get to the, then they hatch a plan to steal a plane. Only the plan is this fucking stupid because the plan is 90% of them are going to sit on a cliff and do nothing while 2 of them just like conveniently drive off into the forest to have a fight scene away from everyone else. They have radio communication in this setting too, but they don't have satellites and they don't have the ability to communicate long distances with the CCT going down. Like, all of this could have been forgiven before Volume 3 when there was a sense that they didn't want to take anything seriously anyway. They were building up aspects of the world, and you think, oh, that's totally fine. You know, it's just world setting flavoring, character flavoring, but really the show's about getting from one action sequence to the next. And this fundamentally comes down, this is the answer to why I had such a different reaction watching volumes 1 and 2 than I did everything else. Right? This goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Like, I rewatched my Q1 and Q2, sorry, V1, V2 QAs, and I had a totally different attitude. I was inspired. I was actually being positive, and the reason is because I didn't expect, well, I didn't expect this show to try to pretend to be a real show. I expected something far lower, or if it was going to pretend to be a real show, well, I would have expected it to handle that with more grace and honesty. But as it stands, every single major thing that's happened has hinged on nonsense. Like, if the first time it happened was Volume 3, and I was really upset with the whole Pyrrha thing, and a little bit dramatic, as some of you may recall, but I decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, all right, let's watch Volume 4. And this could still be a good show, but it's not going to be the same show, because clearly they wanted to do something else. Clearly, this wasn't the point. This was just some weird staging ground, and it all went wrong because Monty died. Then Volume 4 happened, I'm like, ooh, this feels like it could actually be a story. It feels like they're trying to expand the world and build to something. And then Volume 5 happened, and nothing was good, and nothing made sense, and everything was just, you know, everything was just contrivance after boring event with no arcs. Basically, well, no, I'll get to my point. And then another big character assassinating moment happened with Raven in Volume 5, where they just, like, Raven was supposed to be, what? She was supposed to be smart and dangerous and formidable and important and all these things, and then she just gives Yang the relic and flies off. Raven's story resolved. That's it. And then we come to Volume 6, and they do the exact same thing with Ozpin. They do the exact same thing and character assassinate him completely, and a huge, major arc of this story hinges on something that makes absolutely no sense. So that made me realize, it's not, back during the Beacon arc, it's not that, the reason the Volume 3 thing happened wasn't because they were trying to do something else. And, you know, that's what the impression Volume 4 gave, that's the impression Volume 4 gave across. It's more like they just don't know how to tell their own story. They don't have a story, actually. It's more like that. They don't have a story. There is no story. There are no characters. There is a proto-story. There are one-dimensional figments and aspects and aesthetics of characters, but there's no actual story. There's no narrative. There's nothing here that's anchored or solid, period. And Volume 6 has exposed this completely, where nothing that is of importance that happens is interesting or meaningful. And back during the Beacon arc, you couldn't tell. During Volumes 1 and 2 and the first half of Volume 3, you couldn't tell that that was the problem. With Volume 3 ending, you couldn't tell it was the problem either, because maybe you think, okay, maybe they just didn't know how to begin the story. And Volume 4 gave that impression, which is why I was also positive about Volume 4. But after Volume 4, it's clear that they're making things up as they go along. They have like a very vague notion of certain big plot points that are supposed to happen. Clearly the moon is something they knew from the beginning, but like every major character, decision, anything, like everything feels inauthentic and trite and banal and contrived and forced and external and illogical and senseless, and like there's information that's missing that nobody cares about. Everything. And this has just exposed it. And the only reason that didn't come across in Volumes 1, 2, and 4 was because Volumes 1, 2, and 4 didn't have to deliver anything. They were just the setup, right? Those volumes, the reason those volumes weren't bad is because they didn't have to deliver anything important as far as the world. So you never got the sense that there was something fundamentally wrong with how the world was designed. Volume 6 had to deliver, and it tried to deliver, and in presentation and a little bit, it actually delivered. But overall, what Volume 6 did was it revealed the gargantuan lack of storytelling and thought that is present in this show. So right now, I am more or less like confident about the fact that we've been watching something, but it was never a show. It was never a story. Let me put it like this. RWBY is like a fan fiction of itself. Now, the sad thing to say, there are probably fan fictions based on RWBY that are better written than RWBY. RWBY is just that. It's a fan fiction. And I don't mean fan fiction as in fan fiction just means something that's bad. As in, it has the thought of a fan fiction as something that someone threw together haphazardly and thought, oh, this is a cool, neat idea, and never thought to build it, expand upon it, logic it, anchor it, anything, really focused on making it a story and a work, and they just ran with it and turned it into a product. That's what it is. And this goes back to my original question, which is that necessarily a problem? Right? Because we could judge RWBY by two different standards. You can judge it as a story where it fails, which is what I've been doing this entire video, or you can judge it as a piece of as a proto-story, as a neat idea that wasn't really ever developed or fleshed out, that could have been a story, perhaps, if somebody really tried to develop it and flesh it out. It could have been like Avatar if they really tried. Or maybe not like Avatar, maybe it could have been just like something that was very simple, very basic, very just action-packed and cartoony, like a shonen manga or something, which would have been fine too. No real consequences or threats, it would have been fun. But as it stands, it's neither of those things, so it's not a successful piece of content by any of those standards. You have to invent a new standard, and the only standard I can think of but where RWBY is successful is like a first draft, a amateur first draft of a story that can be used in a writing class to teach people how not to write stories, or what they need to do to actually write stories, as well as fantasy settings, because of all the inconsistencies in the setting I've mentioned. The biggest being still that the relative, everything is woke and everything is regressive. Humanity is like ultra advanced and amazing and progressed technologically, despite constantly being threatened and constantly being on the brink of destruction, constantly having their civilization like near apocalypse level of threat. And I just want to bounce back into that point, by the way. I remember back in volumes 1 and 2, they talked about there was like a war between the kingdoms, and there was the Great War, and there was the war with the Faunus. And it's like, you think about like those things, it's like, why were there wars? Well, the reason there were wars was because they thought, oh, this is a fantasy setting, so there's probably going to be wars. Wars between the kingdom. That makes sense. That's probably how they came up with the idea that there should be a war. But if you think about the setting, there's no way that humanity in this setting would have survived if they had ever been at war with one another, because the Grimm would have destroyed them. Think about all the negative attention the Grimm caused. The Grimm are already civilization-threatening force. Imagine what they'd be if humans were killing themselves. But no, but that also just makes no sense. Basically, the only way humanity would even be surviving in this setting is if they're constantly unified and are constantly in the business of being aware of what they're doing to stop the Grimm. But you know what? They're not, because Well, I'll tell you why they're not. Because in order to tell RWBY the way they want to tell RWBY, it's just like they want every single set piece they can. They want Grim to be this epic force that's a challenge. But they also just want, you know, random D&D adventure time in the woods. They want it to feel like a nice, clean little adventure where RWBY and the gang, they go adventuring and traveling and you know, the whole medievalness aspect. And that kind of like low-tier, low-tech adventure, but then they also want to bounce back into this epic, ultimate, there's armies and all this tech and all this amazing shit. They just bounce back and forth because they like all those set pieces, not because any of it makes any sense. They didn't think through this entire setting when they came up with it. This goes back to what I just said. RWBY is a fan fiction of itself. Every single volume is like the next fan fiction that's being designed as a fan fiction based off of the previous volume. And if you think of it like that, it's actually kind of funny. And upon rewatching this volume, I basically was just laughing every time anything was meant to be serious. Like every time you had any kind of dramatic moment, I was just laughing and thinking like, lol, this is like that's the only way to enjoy it, is to just look at it as something that just isn't a story that is like, it's like something that isn't a story that's trying to be and failing. I feel kind of like an asshole now because I feel like making fun of RWBY is like making fun of a like a sad, retarded, like three-legged puppy dog that shits itself and just can't do the things that a normal puppy dog can. That's what it's like to make fun of RWBY, which makes me a pretty big asshole because I'm the one who's making fun of this pathetic attempt at a story. But that's what it is. And I can't, at this point, it's just such a reality that I can't just not say it. It's like as in these QAs and still be honest. There's almost nothing that I can still enjoy in the volume without really bending my brain, right? But as far as like quality is concerned, it's not, unless you apply this weird standard of proto story, RWBY fails by any definition. And then that brings me, I guess, I don't even know if I've covered everything that I wanted to cover, but I mean, you get the general gist of it, the general picture. This brings me to my final point. How do you fix RWBY? Because for a while there, in the proto-story stage, this felt like it was something that could have actually been something, right? Maybe they didn't even need to take the proto-story and turn it into a story. Maybe they could have just cut the proto-story off and told a completely new story and after they figured everything out. But fundamentally, here's how you fix RWBY. You hit the reset button. You cut off the show and you start it all over and you take like a big long pause of like 3-4 years and figure everything out. It's been done before. This has happened in anime. Look at Full Metal Alchemist, and that turned out pretty well. It's not like it would never happen, and it would definitely improve the quality of the show to every single person that already likes it. I know that for a fact. And don't rest absolutely assured that even all the people who've watched this far, who watched my videos where I've thrown vitriol at this series that disagreed with me, I know for a fact, and I know I'm right because I know for a fact all of them would like the show more if it did everything better the way that I say that it should have. But as it stands, there's no way to keep going forward and change the show and make it good. It's not. It's not built on solid ground. Nothing is conceived properly, right? Team RWBY shouldn't even be the main characters, right? The setting overall is rife with inconsistencies, like fucking, again, I've mentioned them, like fundamental things that just aren't well explained in the very structure of the world. The rules that apply to tech and magic and all the material nature of the world are non-existent. The main characters have no arcs. The characters that are meant to have all this impact are made to have no impact in the snap of my fingers, have nothing to offer. Characters that are built up to be everything turn into nothing in a second. It's just a mess. It's a poorly thought out, poorly designed, amateur mess. And the only way to fix it is to restart it. And here's the thing. I'm not even blaming Miles or Carrie for this. People have shit talk Miles and Carrie. I have no problem with Miles and Carrie. I have no reason. I mean, I don't even know. There's not necessarily a good reason to expect them to do this. Remember, they're not dealing with original content that they created. This is something Monty thought up, and who's to say Monty was ever a good storyteller? Monty's just a guy who wants to make action sequences that are cool and epic, right? It's not like he had good ideas. Who fucking knows? Also, the production cycle that they have is pretty fucking stringent. So who's to say that they even have the opportunity to fix all of this, right, in the time that they have? Maybe they're aware of all these problems. No, I'm not blaming them. What I am for getting everything wrong. I'm still criticizing the outcome, though, because the outcome is all wrong. And it doesn't even matter. They could spend years, like they can work their hardest in the time that they have to try and fix RWBY. It's not going to get fixed. I know this for a fact. Volume 7, 8, going forward, it's going to have the exact same problems as all of this. The only way it's not going to have problems is if they try to do a hard reset, which is what they did in Volume 4, which is why Volume 4 felt a little bit better than everything that it had than Volume 3. It felt like this was the beginnings of a new story, and it was going to be good. The only way they can do that is if they do a hard reset again. Is if they basically retcon everything, and it's clear that they've retconned everything, and then they try to build everything from the ground up. And frankly, that's what I think they should do. They should take a good long break of a few years, think through this story, restart it, and then tell it properly with everything anchored and tied down and sensible. But that's not going to happen because nobody wants to listen to my advice. Geesh. And then that brings me to my own reasons for analyzing this show. As it stands, I have no reason to keep watching or QAing RWBY. As far as I can think of, the only reason I would still watch RWBY is just to make sure that I was right about it. Although it's probably going to happen, but I'm still going to do just to make sure because I'm super paranoid. But QAing this, I mean, this is a 2.5-hour video. This is effortful for me. And I rewatched my videos on it, and I had to rewatch the show. That's more work than this is worth, which means, well, I guess I regret to say, but I'm not going to do a QA for Volume 7. That's just not, I don't have, there's more important things to focus on than doing a QA. The only reason I've been going along is for the sake of completionism, because I'm a paranoid completionist and I have to complete things. So that's why I was going along. I might do a QA, an overarching QA of volume, like when they eventually finish the show, I might go back to it and do a QA of everything from beginning to end and basically reflect on whether or not I was right and how it turned out. Maybe, maybe not. I might also change my mind. Who knows? As it stands, it's not something I feel inclined to do. As much as RWBY is so fun to hate, there are more important things to focus on. The same thing applies to Red vs. Blue. As far as I'm concerned, Rooster Teeth content is just falling out of favor everywhere you look. All the big stuff is floundering. And Lord knows, I mean, I'm still going to do that Red vs. Blue QA for when they finish the next arc, but it's probably going to be complete garbage, and I'm going to have to suffer through that shit. But yeah, there you have it. RWBY Volume 6. You've officially broken me. Ugh. One last thing. I don't know if anyone out there who's watched this far, I want to see a meme on Twitter. If anyone who can jump into paid, I might actually just do this myself, which would be hilarious. Based on everything I just said about the you can't fix RWBY thing without resetting it, I want to have a picture of, what's his name? Miles and Carrie, only Miles and Carrie are like, it's that scene where Ozma goes to Jin to ask her how to stop Salem. Only instead of Ozma, it's Miles and Carrie. And instead of Jin, it's Jin's body with her face being the icon for my channel. And instead of asking, how do we stop Salem, they ask, how do we fix RWBY? And Jin said, and I say, you can't. Cheers.